Okay, so welcome back. Today we're going to talk about something you probably have never considered before, and that is how you can do some really awesome graphics in your Visual Studio Windows Forms applications. Now, historically, Windows Forms in Visual Studio is considered to be kind of old and very limited in what you can do graphically to make some really cool user interfaces so people kind of move on and go to the next latest, greatest thing. And the goal of this video is to show you that just because there might not be any built-in functionality for some really cool graphics in Windows Forms, that doesn't mean that you can't get some really cool graphics. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the tech world get familiar with, for example, coding, but they have no clue that there's a whole universe out there of other ways to accomplish things rather than just, hey, if I can't do it in code, it's not doable. Well, no, that's nonsense. There's other ways to accomplish things. So what we're going to talk about in this video is a few very simple and free pieces of software you can use that will allow you to do some really cool stuff in your Windows Forms user interface graphics. And here we've got an application running C# Visual Studio Windows Forms and just some examples of stuff that you can start to think about you can do in Windows Forms. And these are all very simple to do using some external pieces of software, and we're going to talk about. So what do we have here? Basically, we've got a form, and you can see the background is kind of a gradient from gray to almost white. It's got a border around it in black. We've got a flashing light here. This is a button here where it's got a graphic in it with a shadow and looks like some transparency. And here's a lightning shape with a shadow and looks like some transparency. You can see the gradient background showing through here. Here we've got a panel with some radio buttons and it's got a border around it, a blue border. Again, it's got some shadows. And you can also notice that these radio button text looks like it's transparent. So you can see the underlying gradient and shadow in the panel. And then I can press this button. You can see we got some text with some bright colors. So this is just some random stuff I put together, but based on your imagination, you can come up with all kinds of really cool graphic stuff in your Visual Studio Windows Forms application that you may not even be aware of. So let's take a look at some of the applications we can use. Again, they're free applications, very simple, and show you that there's a whole universe of stuff you can try to improve your user interfaces. So here's a list of 3 of the free applications we're going to take a look at. In this video, we're going to focus on the second 2. Maybe we'll do another video focusing on the first one. And these are kind of in terms of simplicity. We've got Visual Studio. You may not be aware, but they have a built-in image editor in Visual Studio that allows you to do some very simple image editing where you can take images and modify them. And we showed how we used that previously to simulate some flashing lights in an application that was simulating the operation of a circuit breaker. So you can do some very simple stuff built in with Visual Studio. You may not know about it. We'll talk about that. There's also a very nice feature in what's called LibreOffice, and that's kind of like a Microsoft Office, but a free version, an open source version, LibreOffice Draw, which is an application that allows you to draw all kinds of cool graphics, do some effects. And then there's another one that's even more complex and a lot more features, and that's called Inkscape. Again, it's free, and you can just download that and do some really cool graphics. So Visual Studio Image Editor is good for simple shapes and doesn't have a whole lot of functionality, but it's great if you just need some simple stuff. Increasing complexity, you've got LibreOffice Draw, which has many shapes, effects. If you've ever looked at LibreOffice Draw or Microsoft Office PowerPoint, there's a lot of built-in shapes and effects that you can do, like shadows and glows and that kind of thing. So we're going to take a look at that. And then Inkscape is a lot more complex. It's got a lot more features. And it uses what are called complex SVG or scalable vector graphics. Now, if you do any graphics, you might be familiar with a free application called GIMP. One of the problems with GIMP is it doesn't do vector graphics, which allows you to draw lines and squares and circles and that kind of thing. We're going to show how you can convert things you develop in LibreOffice Draw, like shapes and effects, bring them into Inkscape and put them into a format that you can bring right into your Visual Studio project and use it as we showed before. So let's start out taking a look at LibreOffice Draw and how you can do some very simple shapes and effects. And then we will show you how you can bring those into Inkscape and modify them if you want, and then convert them to a PNG that you can bring into Visual Studio. So now I'm going to assume you know how to download LibreOffice. Go to LibreOffice.org, and the latest version now is 7.59. Just download. And here is LibreOffice. I've got an example here where I've got some shapes that I've created in LibreOffice. So now let's start up LibreOffice. You can see there's a bunch of different applications. We're going to go to LibreOffice Draw. And it should start up with a blank document here. And if you look over on the left, there's a whole bunch of things you can draw. It's got lines, rectangles, circles, and then it's got some connectors, all different types of shapes, pluses, circles. Got more shapes down here. And you can just go through here and see all the different types of things you can do. So let's say we just want to build a simple rectangle we can use in our Visual Studio Windows Forms application that is kind of a custom border. So I'm going to select this rectangle over here and draw it. You can see it starts out, it's got a fill area. And if you go over here to the right, you can see properties, character, paragraph, area. We've got line, effect, shadow, position, size. So these are all of the things you can vary with that. So if we want to change this fill and make it basically transparent, we go to the area and we can say the transparency is 100%. And then if we want to change the line width, we can go to the line section, and you've got different drop-down choices. You can do solid, dashed, dotted lines. We can change the width, and we're going to choose, say, 1.5 points. Once we've got that, now we can add effects. So we can have like a glow, a soft edge. We can have a shadow, and we can enable shadow. And you can see it gives you a very sharp shadow, and we can change the blur of the shadow. We can increase it, and you can see it changes that. We can change the color, make it a black, a darker shadow. And that's basically all we need to do in our LibreOffice Draw. And now what we can do is we can export that to our other application that we're going to show you how to use, which is called Inkscape. And we're going to show you how to take that into Inkscape and then convert it to the format you're going to need for Visual Studio. Now, it's important here to know that what we want to do is we just want this shape with the shadow and everything to be exported out. And we don't want the entire document. So we want to select this shape with its shadow and go to File, Export, and we'll get this window here. And it's very important we go down here, Save as Type, and we want to save as a SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics. And also importantly is we want to click this selection so it only saves the thing that we have selected. You can see we've selected this. We only want to save that selection, not the entire document. So it's going to save that. We can hit save. And now just this selection is ready to bring into Inkscape. And then we can use Inkscape to modify it if we want and save it as a PNG that we can bring into Windows Forms. Now, that being said, we don't necessarily need LibreOffice Draw. We can do something simple like this in Inkscape. However, there's a lot of stuff here that may not be available in Inkscape. I just want to show you, this is real simple. You just drag and drop and tweak them. It's a little bit more challenging in Inkscape, so there's a couple different ways to do it. So now let's download Inkscape and show you how to bring this in, and then we will be able to save it. So now again, to download Inkscape, you go to inkscape.org, and you can download for Linux, Windows, Mac OS. I assume you know how to do this. So let's start up Inkscape and see what we get. So when you start up Inkscape, you should get something like this. You got all the tools on the left, and like most graphical applications, you got some properties on the right. And what we want to do is we want to import that SVG we saved from LibreOffice Draw. So we're going to go to File, Import, and we're going to go to the SVG we saved, which was untitled, and select Open. And it's going to give us this dialog. And what we want to do is make sure that we open SVG image as a separate document. So there's a bunch of choices. It may default to this first one. We want to make sure we do it as a separate document, and then hit OK. And now we've got, with the shadow, we've got our rectangle with the borderline and transparency. And now what we can do is we can export it as a PNG, or we can modify it more. There's a whole lot of tools in here in Inkscape that you can modify this, but we're just going to do the simple act of converting this to a PNG so that we can load it into Visual Studio Windows Forms. So what we can do is we're going to select this. We're going to click on it and select it. And you can see over here on the right, we've got Document, Page, Selection, and Custom. And that's what we want here. We want just the selection. So we're going to select this tab, and it's got the image size. And down here, it shows an icon of what we've got, which is the border and the shadow. And you can see everything else is transparent. So what we want to do is we want to click down here to browse the export directory. We want to save as type PNG, and I'm going to name it outline3.png and hit save. At this point it is saved to PNG. We can bring it to Visual Studio Windows Forms. So now let's start up a brand new C# Visual Studio Windows Forms application. .NET Framework, and we're using 4.7.2. We're going to create, and here's our form, and all I'm going to do is add what's called a panel, which is like a group box, and we're going to set the background image of this panel to that PNG that we just saved. So I'm going to select this panel, go to background image, and click on that, and we're going to go to local resource. If it's inside of our project, we can use this project resource file, but we're going to use local resource. We're going to import, and we're going to choose this outline3.png that we saved. And here it is. It brings it in, hit OK. And now you can see the panel has this image. However, you notice that it is set, so that is basically duplicating that image. And what we want to do is go down to background image layout. It's set as tile. We want to set it to zoom. And now that it's zoom, it fits in this panel as we resize it. Now keep in mind that because we have shadows, the image itself is larger than the dimensions of this rectangle. So you can see the panel has to be a little bit larger to fit all of the shadows and everything inside of it. But right now we've got a panel that has a nice background to it. We can start this up. And see, here is our panel with the image in it, and it looks real nice. What we're going to talk about in the next video is how we can have different controls and their different images interact with each other, so we can have the transparency we talked about before. Like if we have radio buttons in here, we want them to be transparent. So we're going to have to do a little bit of coding to make that happen, but otherwise this is the basics of how to get something from either your LibreOffice Draw or something like Inkscape and bring it in here so you can have a really nice user interface graphics. So that's about it for this one. If you like any of these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. But most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.